You know, when you get older, like
Here we go.
when you get older, everything in the world touches your glasses. Like, I think your eyebrows get fatter, and your eyes, and like
Well, that's true. Have you ever seen old man eyebrows?
I mean, I'm baffled by the old men that do not take care of their nose hair or their eyebrows.
I think it's something that they're afforded as old men. They don't give a rip about anything.
Well, maybe that's it, but I just often wonder, like, what in the world happens to you between 60 and 85 that you literally do not care about?
Well, you're not too far off from finding out, are you? Let us know.
Uncut. Emotion Chips, the podcast, uncut. For all of you paid subscribers that get the extra juicy details, here we are.
Who's paying?
Nobody.
Who's paying for this gold?
Nobody. Welcome to Emotion Chips, where we talk about the real reason. Everything happens for a reason. It took me a second to remember what was going on.
Perfect.
I'm your host, I think.
Off to a strong start.
Charlie Carroll. Almost forgot that part. Along with my Canty co-host, Mallory Redmond. Canty, Canty co-host, Mallory Redmond. Welcome to the program, everyone. Mal, welcome to the program.
Happy New Year, more importantly.
Happy New Year. New Year's.
We did it.
We did. 1 year of podcasting
Oh,
in the books.
not yet.
Well, almost.
Well, okay. When Gelman, when did
You're going to have to take that out.
when did our first podcast drop? Because
The pandemic.
no, it was in January, but we recorded episode 1 like 17 times.
That is true, ladies and gentlemen.
We recorded it so many times.
We did. But
Anyway, I wasn't talking about 1 year of podcasting. I was talking about it's a new year. It's 2021, January 1st.
yes. Amazing. What do you think of my T-shirt? Do you like my T-shirt?
It's fine. It looks like you made it in your basement.
My daughter made it.
Oh, well, I thought you spend a lot of money on it. You know, you buy stuff that looks.
Yeah, that's kind of it,
Can we
right?
start over?
Yeah.
Yes, I heard that she's pushing T-shirts for
I mean, it's really good, isn't it?
$20 or something.
This morning I was over at the restaurant and someone said, "Oh, that looks like you paid $100 for it," and that's kind of what you're saying.
That's
like,
what I was making fun of.
yeah, and my daughter made it.
Nice.
So she's on Instagram selling these.
Okay,
Get them started early. Female entrepreneurs.
great.
I think it's Kate Elise on Instagram. I follow her, so you can find her from my account. But yeah, I thought all of my children are into this entrepreneurial way.
That's good.
Did your Christmas end well? Did your Christmas holiday end well, Mal?
It both started well and ended well. Yes,
Oh, good.
it was great. Very low key, as I think most people's Christmas holiday was.
Yes.
But yeah, it was fun. You know, my girls are getting to an age where they like do stuff.
Yeah, and enjoy it.
Yeah, so it's really fun to see Christmas through their eyes.
Yes. I remember those days.
How was yours?
It was good. On the road, doing a little working over Christmas, but it was good. We were out in Montana, and it's amazing out there. Just big sky, Montana.
It's literally
Wild.
what they call it. Yes.
Yeah. Looking up at the stars at night when you're out in the middle of nowhere is amazing. Mm-hmm. And then had a number of good conversations. So a friend of mine, her family pioneered really the media business in the United States. And I was with her and some of her family, and we had some really good conversation just about where everything's at with, obviously this year has drawn a lot of attention or given the media an opportunity to, everybody's been going to the news because of the pandemic and
Yeah.
everything else. And so it was good. I asked them, because of how iconic they are as a family, just what their thoughts were. And it was interesting. One of the things that stood out to me is they are now in their mid-60s, but they were referring to their father, who really did grow it to be an empire here in the United States, to where they owned more news stations and newspapers by far than anyone else. And I was just asking them like what they thought about all that is going on in the news these days, where it seems to be a lot less journalism and a lot more commentary or just sharing of opinions. And they referred to a story where their father in the late 90s, who was responsible for just building this media empire that started with their great-grandfather, who purposely got into it to bring integrity to journalism, right? And like really represent the people and bring straightforward facts to people. And so their father was saying in the mid to late 90s that basically the train had jumped the tracks, and that the accountants had taken over the media business. And it just got me thinking, when you're a publicly traded company, that now you have an obligation by law to your investors, right, to your shareholders, to produce a profit. And it got me thinking of Jesus' words where he said that the root of evil is the love of money. And that just really stood out to me in light of everything that we have seen this year through the presidential election to the pandemic, that here's a person or a family that have had as much to do with media and communication on a massive scale as anyone, that just said, 20 some years ago, their father who grew this just recognized even then that the accountants had taken over.
Right. It's so sad.
Well, but if evil is darkness, if it's the absence of light, and it really represents selfishness and self-interest. It just got me thinking about, when profitability has to be the goal, how many people are going to suffer for that. And you end up, when you chase money and wealth, you end up undermining the very thing that you want and you're looking for, which is security,
Yeah. Well, for me, as someone, I grew up wanting to be a journalist. I studied it in college. That's what I wanted to do. I appreciate communication and writing and all of that. And to see now, I look at the media and I for the most part, I know okay, this news media outlet leans this way. And so I just have to filter everything that I'm reading with the knowledge of their political leanings mostly. But I was telling you earlier, there are nuggets of such goodness in the media. I also grew up as a gymnast, and these days, when I meet another gymnast, there's almost this unspoken conversation we're having beneath the conversation that is essentially saying, were you sexually assaulted?
Yeah.
Because it has been so rampant. And the Indianapolis Star was is the newspaper that broke the story about the trainer Larry Nasser, who sexually assaulted, hundreds of girls. And so I watched this documentary about it, and I was in tears, not only because I have this background as a gymnast and I know people who have been victims of sexual assault, but that's what journalism's meant to be, is telling the truth and bringing light to places of such darkness for the sake of redemption and healing and all of that. That's one aspect that I think journalism was meant to fulfill, and we've just gotten so far away from it.
Yeah, and getting into the emotion ship or the energy that is in motion, it's interesting how the pursuit of one need in our life can be compromised by an idea that you can get that a different way that maybe doesn't cost as much. And so when I look at this family as an example, the reason why the great-grandfather got into it in the first place was that very idea, bringing light to situations. And so any good idea, and this is for all of you entrepreneurs out there, until you build something and grow something that becomes bigger than you don't understand the liabilities that come with success. Mm-hmm. And so we all ask for and want success, but rarely do we see or know everything that surrounds that. And so he builds this media empire over, 5 or 6 generations. Mm-hmm. And the very good idea that made him successful of bringing light to the darkness, eventually that organization becomes bigger than one man's vision. And like my friend's father said, the accountants take over. And then, almost a whole new idea has to, from a different person or a different group, has to come forth in order to try to correct that.
For sure. And it's ever with politics and healthcare.
Well, sure. And that's what it got me thinking of, is just like, it's hypocritical to talk about disease and cancer and how bad it is if we are unwilling to address like our food system here in the United States, where we know that food that is manufactured with a lot of synthetic products and chemicals in it are not good for people. But yet in the free market or enterprise, we allow people to do that, where you make the cheapest product with the highest amount of return, and then you sell it to people. And I think what could be discouraging if you did not understand that is then we act like disease, comes out of nowhere and it's a surprise and we can't control it. But then again, you get into healthcare and look at, who owns and runs hospitals and who influences and writes textbooks for our doctors that are being trained. And you start to understand, and it comes back to Jesus' words there in Matthew 11, that it's the love of money or prioritizing profit that tends to be the root of evil. And don't miss the significance, especially when this was written over 2,000 years ago, of the idea of a root of something. And because obviously agriculture was everything for everyone during that day and age. Everyone knew how to grow their own food, and everyone focused on the roots because your root system determined everything else. And Jesus just practically said, when profit or money becomes the pursuit, it's like a root. It is at the foundation of all darkness, of all evil. And so I don't think we got here on purpose. Like most things in life, you start off with a good intention, and then it can very easily grow to an extent that starts to do more harm than good. And so you look at our food system, you look at our healthcare system, you look at media, and, I just keep going back to these words where a pioneer and an icon, of one of these industries just said, like, the accountants have taken over.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is just really wild. And so it's an opportunity for new ideas to grow and to be birthed and to try to get back to a place where people are put first.
Yeah. It feels almost impossible. I mean, when you start thinking about the accountants, I mean, just like how widespread, think about like professional sports and, I mean, like all entertainment, like it just feels like it's everywhere.
Yeah, for
Churches, like it's
for sure.
It's very widespread.
Yeah, it is. And, that's why one of the things that we really focus on here on the podcast is just the idea of like holistic, intrinsic health and getting behind the why, which we'll talk about that a little bit later, that the why is very important. The what is important, the how, but your why has a lot to do with the integrity of the idea, which has a lot to do with the energy behind anything. And so over Christmas, I was there working and saw the news flash of what was going on in Nashville.
Yeah.
And the bombing that took place. More is unfolding with that. But, now it's starting to turn out that here is a gentleman that was disgruntled and had said a lot of things to the people closest to him, to include his girlfriend, that he wanted to go after or make a statement to the communication or media industry just about the fact that, he thought they were dishonest and corrupt. And so he builds this bomb in an RV, and obviously there's still a lot more that needs to come out. But, I think just yesterday or the day before, we heard that his girlfriend had gone to the authorities a year ago and said, you have got to watch this guy. Like he is researching and looking for a way to make a statement. You need to watch him. And how many times have we heard that? In the investigation or security world, these are the things that you're told about all of the time, like just watching and profiling, because often it's going to come out and they're going to talk to someone, and can you take it seriously? But what ends up happening is there is so much of that talk these days that you don't know what voice to listen to.
Exactly. Did they look into him at all?
I have yet to go there to see, I want to say that I saw something that said they had looked into him, but, it's hard to tell. And that's the day and age in which we live. Here's this guy that luckily, did not do more damage. He did obviously a lot of damage to buildings.
Sure.
There in front of AT&T in Nashville. But he did not take a lot of lives. He was trying to make a statement, but that's the nature of the world that we live in. And I think that's some of his point in going after like a telecommunication company, is like the world is so noisy. And this is essentially what we were just talking about with like all of the headlines of fake news and do you wear a mask? Don't you wear a mask? A lot of people just don't know and are so tired. They've checked out because they hear so many conflicting opinions. They don't know who to trust.
For sure.
And I think in a lot of ways we've lost our ability to hear because of how noisy everything is.
Yeah. Well, then I feel like the easy response for people is like, well, just go do your research. And it's like, where? Like
Sure.
You could do your research anywhere and get different conflicting responses. Like that feels like a cop-out response in and of itself of just doing your research. Cause it's between a rock and a hard place, it feels like, for a lot of us who are tempted to check out. And then people say, well, just do your research for yourself. And that is just as difficult.
Well, and again, we tend to lack some of the tools these days that are required to be a critical thinker, that you really have to have the ability to dive deep. I was reading some research this morning from a group out of Florida, out of the University of Florida, that has studied multiple states with wearing a mask. And they were doing it, I think, per 100,000 cases, or maybe it was 10. But the idea was that the statistics were coming back showing that the states that did not have a mask mandate, there was 17 cases per 100, whereas the states that did have a mask made you wear a mask, it was 27 out of 100 positive cases. And their point was, right now we don't have any research that says wearing a mask or having a mask mandate actually helps the situation. And so then you have to have the ability to just dive in and really look into those statistics. But overall, I think what we see is the frustration of a lot of people just putting more and more noise.
But I feel like there are studies as well that promote that back the use of masks.
Sure.
Just to play devil's advocate. And aren't these people that are doing the studies funded by various organizations that have their own?
And I think that's part of, the tools that people need to think critically, to get in there and figure out like who is funding this study. And typically it all revolves around one word, right? Like that the information is going to be bent around one word. Type of thing. And in this case, they were talking about a mask mandate. I do think there's scientific evidence out there that shows that wearing a mask blocks larger particles getting out into the air. And, though I'm not particularly fond of wearing one myself, like I wear one and don't have a problem wearing one in public, if for no other reason than to help people feel comfortable.
Sure.
And where we live, it is a mandate. So you just wear it.
Right.
But I think, there's a difference between hearing and listening.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we understand that just because someone hears does not mean they are listening, or even that they have the ability to hear what is being said. And so even the fact that we have opened up and are talking about like what has happened with the news industry or the medical community or our food industry really is a byproduct of how communication has changed versus the way it used to be, which is person to person, right? Like the communities were small enough that you got to see a person's character and they became known by what they could do and how they carried themselves. And that was like your primary qualifier for, is this person a person worth listening to? Now, I mean, think about how much information and different opinions we are inundated with just by social media alone.
Right. Well, and I mean, kind of, because you get to choose who you follow on social media. So you don't even have to follow people with different opinions. You can just sort of soak up all of the agreeable opinions in your life.
Yeah. But that being said, like I was talking with someone here recently, and we were talking about the idea of like a mentor, and they were asking me about people that had mentored me in the past. And, you know, mentors are important, and I think we should all have one. But the truth of the matter is, like, you have got to develop the ability to listen and to hear, or a mentor doesn't really matter.
Right.
And so all of us were made in a way that we want to grow and we want to evolve, but we have a responsibility to be people that are hungry for growth and change, which comes through our ability to hear.
Yeah. When I was this is so funny. I have this memory like locked in my mind. I was in 5th grade in Mrs. Shellhammer's class, and you would have hated this.
Probably.
We were reading a story, and she was having like different kids in the class read a paragraph. You hated reading aloud, didn't you?
Gosh, yeah.
And so,
well, that's when I said goodnats one time, and the whole class erupted.
Yeah, see, that's
I'm scarred.
locked in your mind. Anyway, this girl, Sarah, I actually talked about her before. She had the Dallas Cowboys starter jacket, Sarah Nemick.
Wow.
And so Mrs. Shellhammer said, okay, raise your hand if you want to read the next paragraph. Bunch of kids raised their hand. Sarah raised her hand. And then another kid, Brandon, raised his hand. Mrs. Shellhammer looked at Sarah, like made eye contact, but then she moved on and she called on Brandon. But Sarah was, I think because of the eye contact, she was expecting to be called on.
Yeah.
And so Mrs. Shellhammer said, okay, Brandon, and Sarah starts reading the paragraph. And this is, I think, like the difference between listening and hearing. Like she heard that Mrs. Shellhammer like spoke, but she wasn't listening to what she was saying. She was just assuming like, I think she's going to call on me. So Sarah just like went ahead and like went on and started reading. And Mrs. Shellhammer was like, I didn't call, like I said Brandon. But I think so many of us do that. It's like, I see that you're saying words and I'm just going to run. Like I will acknowledge that you're speaking and now I'm going to go and do my thing. When it's like, you heard nothing. Like literally you did not hear the words that came out of my mouth.
Yeah.
And a lot of us operate like that. Like I want to be known as someone, like I want to acknowledge that I heard you, but I don't really care to do what you said.
Well, yeah. And I think, you know, coming at it as we're here at the beginning of a new year, and a lot of people are going to have New Year's resolutions and want literally to experience real change this year. Mm-hmm. What blows my mind, and I can just speak for myself, we often hear what we want to hear.
Sure, exactly. That's what Sarah did. She wanted to be called on.
Yeah, and so I can remember when we were going to open Table 33, we had walked through a number of spaces. We had landed on one. The landlord turned out to be just a nightmare. And so we were looking for another space. And I can remember a friend of mine who had been in the restaurant industry many times. And I asked them to walk through it with me. Mm-hmm. And they walked through it and they're like, I don't think this is right for this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason. And I ended up choosing still that space, and now have had to go back to them on multiple occasions and like, you know, everything you said about that space, like you were right.
Really?
And I couldn't even hear it.
Why?
Because my biases blocked my ability to hear.
You wanted that space so bad? or what?
Yeah, I saw the positive things about it.
Sure.
And so it's amazing. Like I did this when I was building a social media platform that your biases, you'll see a good idea, you'll see the potential, whatever, and you don't hear the people that have been there and done that. And so when I was having this conversation about a mentorship, like a good mentor is someone that has been there and done that. That's 50% of the equation. The other part of the equation is, do you have the ability to get around your biases and actually hear what's being said versus what you want to hear? Another mentor in my life ended every one of our 30 to 60 minute talks with, now tell me what you heard.
Yeah.
Because he knew I was so like zealous and ambitious that often he would say something and my mind would start running and I was ready to go. Mm-hmm. And so he would purposely come back to me and say, tell me what you heard.
Yeah.
That
is a brilliant question.
It really is. It really is. Because often when you're young, you don't appreciate all of the work that goes into understanding any specific thing. And so you're young, and my great grandmother used to say that she was going to ask the Lord why he wasted energy on the youth, right? Like why you have so much energy when you're young.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
And then you're older and you don't have as much. But it's just like often that energy will manipulate us in that we lose the ability to hear.
Right.
And going back to the words of Jesus just said, if you have ears to hear, let them hear. Meaning just because you do have ears that hear doesn't mean you're actually hearing what is being said at any given time.
Right. How do you even acknowledge, do you just assume you have biases or do you need to know exactly what they are?
Well, I think we all have biases, and that's why I think, if you ask me as to what is a major thing that undermines our ability to hear, like insecurities would be one of those things, or past trauma would be another one of those things. Like diversity and putting yourself in places where people exist that don't agree with you or don't see the world the way that you see it is very important. For me, if you're very quick to shoot down anything, someone else's opinion, like that's probably a good indicator that you have some real trauma and you have built this belief system that is tight and cozy, and you've fortified it from the outside with, what I would say is probably religious lies to keep yourself from being uncomfortable, because anytime you're uncomfortable, it stimulates old trauma patterns, which you didn't have the ability to handle it when you were a kid. And so you just kind of figured out how to certify, here are the things that are true in life, and I don't really want to consider anything else type of thing. And so I answering your question, I think you have to suspect that you have biases. And listen, insecurity, personal insecurity is one of the biggest things that will jam you up when it comes to hearing. A couple of years ago, I have a friend that's a really good ENT in town, doc. And I said, he said to me, like, hey, I haven't checked your ears out. I actually was going to him for my nose because I had broken my nose playing basketball. And he said, well, I'm going to check your ears out while I've got you here. So ENT is ear, nose, and throat, for those of you that are.
He's writing it in the air in case you were curious what letters look like. Yeah.
And so he's like, I'm going to check your ears out while you're here. And he's like, oh my gosh, which you don't want to ever have a doctor that has a microscope in your ear, like his little seeing tool, to say, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I don't think you really ever want a doctor, whatever kind of doctor. Yeah, that's alarming.
Probably not.
Yeah.
And so he goes, all right, hold on. And he goes and gets this little pocket protector set of tools and
cleaned your ears out.
Starts getting in my left ear, and it is hurting bad. And he's like, okay, this has kind of grown into your skin, but I'm going to get it. And goes on to pull out this combination of skin, earwax, and cotton from a Q-tip that he thinks had grown over a 10-year period of time and thought was probably blocking at least 50% of my hearing in my left ear.
That's so disgusting.
Yeah. It came out like a bullet that you load in a musket. Like it had just been pound in there. And the idea is like, that is a good picture for what can happen to us from a hearing standpoint, that over time, all of these things get compounded and block your ability to hear. And in a lot of ways, it's just a protection mechanism that we want to see the world the way we see it without considering anything else, because based on, again, what you've gone through or what your beliefs are, like you will end up isolating yourself so that you don't have to take on the idea of uncertainty.
I can't stop judging you.
That's okay.
Cool.
I haven't used Q-tips since.
Yeah, I bet. How traumatic.
Yeah.
I also have my own ear story, but I don't feel like mine's as gross. I have...
Well, then, of course, you can tell it.
Yeah, exactly. I have mine's a genetic condition that I did not know I had until maybe 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago. And what was happening is I was somewhere that had a rickety ceiling fan, and I was laying on my left side, and I was trying to fall asleep. It was in a bedroom, and the ceiling fan was super loud. And so I was just trying to fall asleep in the midst of it, and turned around to my other side, and I couldn't hear the ceiling fan anymore. And I'm like, oh, this is a problem. And so a million doctors later, I've ended up having surgery on both of my ears. But what this reminds me of is, like, I had lost a substantial amount of my hearing, and in a lot of cases, it was super convenient.
Yeah.
Like, how nice. I don't have to be bothered by the ceiling fan anymore. Like, this is actually kind of a blessing. And obviously, for the most part, I wanted my hearing back. But there were parts of it that were really helpful to not have to hear.
Sure.
And I think we operate like that a lot of times. Like, oh, I can't hear that. And that's actually really convenient for me to not be able to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. We talk a lot about energy on the podcast, and that there's like the book The Secret that talks about the law of attraction, and kind of gets into the quantum realm where all of energy exists. The book of Colossians basically says this is the energy that God put into the world that grows all things and keeps all things held together. And when I was having this conversation about like a mentor, I was saying how important it is to find someone that is connected to that supernatural, eternal energy, that is like the real difference. Like, you want to find someone who has real evidence of being connected to something greater than themselves. And so we were talking about that, and he said, well, I would say you're a person that has that. How did you get that? And I said, well, kind of dissecting, words, we talk about prayer and meditation. And like, I spent a very solid year in prayer and meditation. And sometimes that would go 4 hours a night. Sometimes it would go 6 hours a night. Sometimes I wouldn't sleep, and it went 10 hours a night. And what I was saying is, like, I really moved into this idea of getting connected to this, supernatural energy where everything exists. And so when you understand that, like, we use words like prayer and meditation, but really what we're talking about is learning to hear this invisible energy and respond to it. When we do, emotional resets, which is the process of getting negative energy that is lodged in the body somewhere out over at Body Garage Dayton, you're just learning to hear what is there. And so we'll hear like, anger is on the inside of the right thigh, or disappointment is lodged in the hamstring, or they've got this problem going on with their Achilles tendon, and it goes back to when they were 6 years old. And, people will be like, well, how in the world are you hearing this? And it's the same thing when someone goes to have their palm read. Someone will say, we'll write it off and ask if someone's a witch doctor or, something, a psychic. Sorry. But it just comes back to, these are people that have tuned into this energy, and the energy speaks. Like, all energy speaks. And so when we get into the idea of being someone that listens and can actually hear what's being said, obviously we're talking much more than just, another person's words.
Yeah.
And life tends to work out a lot better for people when they can tune into the invisible words and language that is being spoken, and hear it and do something with it. Like, I remember being in college, and I wanted to open up an indoor training facility because I had just come out of being a professional athlete who trained 10 hours a day. And Amy and I had moved to Greenville, South Carolina, and there was not an indoor soccer facility or indoor training facility that focused on helping athletes learn how to move their body in a way that would serve them in their sport. And so I come up with this business plan, go to someone, ask them to be the investor. I'm going to be the CEO and run it. And again, I'm in school at the time. I'm coaching at the time to bring money in for us. And I'll never forget, on my way to closing, I hear this voice in the car. I was on Batesville Road. I know exactly where I was. And this voice says to me, "Don't do it." And I'm literally a mile away from the facility, and I'm going to sign this document. My investor's going to be there, everything. And I went ahead and signed it. I went ahead and did it because I felt like I could not, like, my pride kept me from backing out at the last moment. And I think I compromised a lot. I did it. We built it. We were the first people to bring Astroplay, which is a synthetic turf that you can wear cleats on. We were the first people to bring it into South Carolina. I learned a lot. Thousands of kids came through there. But 2 years later, I moved out of South Carolina prematurely, not knowing I was going to, and had to give the business to my investor. And though I learned a lot, I lost a lot, time-wise and money-wise. And it's all because I did not have the ability to listen to what I heard.
Okay, so I want to rewind a little bit because you just said a lot. You talk about having a mentor who you can tell is connected to greater energy. I can't remember the way that you phrased it.
Yeah.
Let's start there. How do you know that is someone who, is it something that, is that like a conversation that you have? Like, how do you know? Because there's a lot of people I think who are in community with people they think could be a mentor of theirs,
Sure.
but it might not be someone who has this kind of great eternal, it's like connection to eternal energy.
It's tough because I think I told you this story the other day. Going back to the training facility, when I was down in Florida training at International Performance Institute, which was a creation by Mark Verstegen, who still is like the guru in like biomechanics and sports training. He's out in Arizona now and works with everybody, to include like the NFL, MLS, MLB. Like, he's just insane. And I worked with him for 4 years, and he had built this staff of like world-renowned trainers, and they always used to laugh. These are just like the best of the best, and we were athletes at the time. And so one of the things that they used to say, and I think Jack Black says this, and I don't remember what movie, but those who can do, and those who can't teach. And they would just laugh at themselves because they were teachers.
Yeah.
Right. In the moment that they got close to playing professional sports, but now for one reason or another, they were coaching and teaching. And, I think about that when I think about a mentor, because often the great entrepreneurs don't slow down until they're in their 60s or 70s. And so there's not a lot of room for them to mentor because they're still, chasing the rabbit.
Sure.
And so if you're out there and you're looking for a mentor, I never understood this the way I do now. If you can find someone that has evidence that they know how to build something that is bigger than themselves, that brings life to people, right, that really is delivering life and energy to people, what you have to do is you have to be willing to lose to win. You have to go and offer yourself to them just to get close to them. And so, I have a number of people on a regular basis that say, hey, I want to do something with you. Hey, I want to work with you. Hey, I want to work for you. Hey, I want to hang out. Hey, I want more of your time. And like, I want that too. Like, I like giving my time to people. I like offering my time to people. But the truth of the matter is, I have a number of organizations that have a number of people in them already, and that demands my time. And so I don't have a lot of opportunities to mentor another person because a lot of my life and energy is spent working with the people that are already involved. And so if I would have understood this when I was on the other side of it, when I did not have any organizations and I wanted to be strapped to somebody that had evidence of being able to deliver life to people in a way bigger than just themselves, I would have gone and offered myself to them and said, hey, I'll work for you for free. Like, let me make a difference in your life, and that's good enough. And so I would just say, if you're out there listening and you want to be a better writer or a better basketball player or whatever it is that you're interested in, like if you're an aspiring chef and you want to fast track and take years off of, like catapult yourself forward, go find that chef or that writer or that photographer that inspires you, that has real life evidence of being an influential person, and give yourself to them. Now, they can't have just a skill and no character. That's where abuse happens. There are, and it's becoming less and less because there's more accountability because of communication these days. However, there is still a real possibility that someone can be very gifted with very little character. That's a recipe for disaster. But if you can find someone that has decent, it doesn't have to be incredible, but decent character with a great competence, go give yourself to them. This is happening in the big cities all across the world every day, that if there's a world-renowned chef, you're going to be number 1,000 in line to work with them unless you find a way to volunteer. And so your path to working with that world-renowned artist might be cleaning the floors and dumping the trash and just putting yourself in their presence on a regular basis. And there you have an opportunity to show them that you have enough of the basics like determination, creativity, hard work, good communicator, consistent. You show up and then they say, okay, I'm going to give you a chance. There's a verse in Proverbs that talks about how a slave can be treated better than a son based on how hard they work and what they show up with. And so when I think about mentorships, I go back to that quote from some of the trainers, like those who can do. So the real entrepreneurs out there that can, they're out there doing it, which means their time is very limited. Those who can't, they teach. So you have a whole industry of mentors out there that never did it themselves, but they've read a hell of a lot of books about entrepreneurship and they can talk it like they've done it. But really at the end of the day, they haven't done it. They haven't. And if you're not careful, you'll go and ask to be mentored by them and they'll give you a fancy number of, $200 a session or $1,000, a week or a month or whatever it is. And ultimately at the end of the day, they haven't really done it. They've just studied it. And there's a difference between those two. And I'm not saying that the people that have not done it, that have studied it are all bad or that they can't add value to your life. But getting back to answering your question, like how do you find that person? For me, you've got to find the person that has evidence of being out there and being in that industry and having some success. And sometimes, actually, a lot of times, success is a number of losses. I can talk about pretty much anything from a business standpoint, not necessarily because of all my victories, but I've lost a lot of money learning what to do and what not to do.
Well, and I think when you talk about listening and hearing, like the person who told you that you shouldn't use that space for the restaurant, you can't take every piece of advice from right. Even from your mentor.
Sure.
They're still in the process as well. So I think there has to be some level of risk involved in being willing to And we talk about this, being willing to fail and being willing to screw up, even if you feel like you are both hearing and listening.
Sure.
Right? Like
Yeah.
there's a level of discernment where people have to trust the mentor or trust themselves at some point.
Yeah. And those decisions, I mean, those intersections are real. And sometimes you got to go your own way and it works out. And sometimes it doesn't. But, the conversation that I was having ultimately was about how do you get your life to be a life that other people want to be a part of? Like, how do you start to build real equity in life? Like, how do you start to stockpile assets and minimize your liabilities? And it comes back to you've got to be a person that's hungry to hear. You show me your eagerness, like let's get into the practical side of this when it comes to not necessarily how do I know if I hear, but how do I position myself to hear more and to listen? And I'll connect your potential, like your future potential, to how eager you are right now to hear. And so the people that I know that are really successful, their desire to hear from someone else grows. Whereas when you're young and you don't understand any better, you don't want to listen to anyone. Like, think about our children, right? They don't want to listen to anyone. And that's a sign of immaturity. The more I know and the more I accomplish, I want to listen more. Like, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm reading books, and I'm purposely going out of my way to listen to different people because I know that I have got to push out the walls that naturally set in because you're a human being. And it's a lot easier to just listen to people that sound like you.
For sure.
And so, for me, it's how eager am I to give the keys over to someone else or the wheel over to someone else and say, now tell me what you think about this. Like, I seek it out.
Yeah.
I go and seek information and ideas from other people, and I'm more than willing to consider where I'm wrong or how I have gotten this wrong. And that's not a sign of a lack of faith. That, in my opinion, it's a sign of faith. That my sense of security does not rest in or is not anchored in my beliefs. And people will say, well, how in the world can you be, a religious leader, which I'm not a religious leader, by the way.
Why are you using that example then?
What?
A religious leader.
Well, because my title of pastor is going to have people put me in the camp of being a religious leader. And I'll be associated with that, right? Just because of my title of a founding pastor at City Church. But the idea is, even though I'm involved with a church, I can see in both the Old and New Testament that it's faith over belief. And faith develops beliefs, but we don't want our beliefs to overshadow or block out our faith. Abraham, Moses, Joseph, Jesus, Paul, all of these people did things because of their faith, which is direction in the midst of uncertainty. I think this is what's being said to me, so I'm doing it. That compromised belief. Same thing with Peter. And so I just think that it's important to understand that a part of having faith, strong faith, is the ability to hear and question things that might not make sense initially.
Or that you don't agree with.
Or that you don't agree with, of course.
I think that's huge. If you are unwilling to continue learning, which is to accept different new ideas or to place yourself in conversations or whatever that are diverse, opinions that are diverse, or if your mentor is not willing to do that, your growth is going to be so stunted. Because you're just it's comfort versus discomfort, in my opinion. Learning is uncomfortable. Yeah. And it's hard, but the alternative is a tiny little sad life. Yeah.
And you recently shared at City Church just about that, cultivating a mindset where you don't have to have everything figured out.
Yeah.
You don't have to know everything.
Well, what happens when you do? I mean, where do you go from there? If you have everything figured out, that sounds super boring,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Well, and I'm just trying to associate with people, like, you're not compromising your faith by being open to a direction that you could be led, or what you think you're hearing from this eternal energy that we call God.
Sure.
Right? Like, the idea of the word God is a description to try to describe a reality that's greater than our ability to describe it. And so when you associate faith with a set of beliefs that does not change, you actually limit your ability to hear something that God might want to say to you.
Yeah. So people who are just like getting into this, like hearing eternal energy, what's your advice?
Well, you've got to, first of all, recognize your need for it. I think, again, like going back and talking about our children don't want to listen. But if you put yourself in the presence of a very wise person that has lived a lot of life and has experienced a lot of things that would make them an influencer, someone that other people want to listen to, I mean, they're super hungry.
Yeah.
To still learn. They are super hungry, because you can get to a place where you realize that the more you know, you realize the more you don't know. Mm-hmm. And you're hungry to listen and to learn, and you assume very little, because approaching life with as an open canvas lifts your head and your eyes so that you can see more and consider more. And what I was saying about, all of the religious stuff over the last 5 minutes, or an understanding of God, is, your faith and the strength of who God is not grounded in your ability to comprehend or interact with it. That if you are, a Catholic or a Protestant, God's capabilities to take care of you and provide for you and protect you and lead you, if you really read sacred scripture, is not rooted and grounded in your strength as the individual. It's rooted and grounded in Him. And so I've always kind of poked fun of and asked people to reconsider whether or not they close their eyes when they pray, because, squeezing your eyes tighter, or clenching your fist or whatever it is, or praying longer, doesn't necessarily mean you're doing anything. Like, the potential for this eternal energy that we describe as God is not rooted and grounded in me. Mm-hmm. It's rooted and grounded in Him, mm-hmm. and His character. And so that gives me the space to take a deep breath and to trust the process, that my good intentions actually come from Him, and He's ahead of me. He's not behind me, and He will finish what He started. Yeah. And I say He, but I mean, He and she is wrapped up in the image and the identity of God. Mm-hmm. And so it just comes back to, what is it that's keeping you from hearing? You might hear what is being said to you, or you might hear that invisible energy, but you can't listen to it because you are not yet at a place where you're confronting your biases. And for some of you out there, the reason why you can't hear anymore is because you're not doing anything with what you hear now. You've got mentors and people in your life that are telling you things, and you take that as a consideration, and you don't do it. Yeah. And so when you put yourself, the first part is put yourself in a place where you can hear somebody that's worth listening to. Step 2 is, if you want to evolve and take that further, you need to listen by faith. You need to practice doing things that you are uncomfortable with, because a person of influence that has character asked you or told you to do it, and you can show yourself more than anybody else, how to execute an idea. If I had, and I will, this is something I'm very aware of. When someone asks me to mentor them or tells me how much they want to be involved in my life, I will cut through to the core of their motivation very quickly.
Sure.
And I'll say something like, cool, you know where I'm at this day, this day, this day, and this day. Just show up. And when they don't show up, I don't follow up because I'm not going to waste my time with it. And so, then there's like people that are already in my life that you're either on the way up or you're on the way out. You're either going to get closer or you're going to get further away. And it's not that I'm special. This is true of everybody. We all have this scale, this ladder in our life that people are either growing closer or they're growing further away. And a lot of that just has to do with the rhythms of growth that we are all in. Right. Sometimes my rhythm of growth is going to take me further away from you. Sometimes it's going to bring me in closer to you. But if you want to know whether or not you're primed to grow and become the full version, of yourself, are you putting yourself in places where you can hear someone that's worth listening to? B, when they ask you to do something or tell you to do something, A, do you do it? And B, how well do you do it? Some people lose their opportunity to keep hearing from someone that is worth listening to because they can't ever do what they're asked to do in a decent fashion.
Yeah.
Why? Because they take 5 steps or 5 days away from what they were asked, and their biases end up undermining them and they can't execute. And it's just something that we all have to learn to grow through. But sometimes we've got to get to such a barren, empty place that there's not much that we have to distract us from listening.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that's where it feels, that's sort of like the rock bottom type of place.
For sure.
Right? Where it's like, well, there's nowhere to go but up.
Well, and that's a great Saturday Night Live skit. Way, 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 way back in the day.
Oh, I'm not old enough for that.
You are definitely not. But that's the whole thing. Like sometimes you've got to get to such a low place that you actually now have the hunger to listen.
Yeah.
And so a key indicator as to whether or not you're headed in the right way is how hungry are you to act as if you know very little. And all I'm saying from my personal experience and some of the great people I've had an opportunity to be around, the more a person knows, the more they tend to handle themselves in a way that says, I don't know. This is probably how I would handle it if I were you, but I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
And that mentality creates an environment for great faith to be practiced. Certainty, we know who God is, we know how God always thinks, is an environment that is unintentionally created that needs no faith.
Right.
And if you read your Bible and you read a lot of sacred scripture, you know that magic happens where faith exists. So faith exists where there is an abundance of uncertainty, not certainty. And so if you're discouraged because you're going through hard times right now where you don't know what's going to happen next, good. You're in a great place for faith.
Exactly.
And faith is where the magic happens.
What a great way to kick off the new year.
For sure. For sure.
Not comfortable, but not boring.
Yeah.
Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, you just said it all.
Are you done?
You just said it all right there.
Perfect.
Yeah. So if I were you and I was kicking off this new year, I think it really comes back to like, be super, super hungry to hear, even more than doing. It's
and listen.
it's now
hear and listen.
Yeah, hear and well, yeah. I mean, but you got to start with a hunger to hear before you can listen. Your husband, speaking of media, has tried to fact check me on this one because.
Oh, are you doing an Abraham Lincoln thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You know,
you're so predictable.
Somebody, Abraham Lincoln's repeated it. I don't know if he came up with it, but just talked about the importance of sharpening your axe. Everybody runs out to the field to get their trees cut down. And he said he'd spend the first 4 hours of his day sharpening the axe. And so I think, especially in light of 2020, 2021 is begging for you to slow down and to listen and to become efficient versus just and we're going to end the podcast where we started with all of this noise. Like, don't enter the noise and think that you can just do your way out of where you are. Slow down and tune in and sharpen your ability to turn your hearing into listening, and then you will have a year that you want to hear or have.
It's good.
Cue the music.
Here we go.